Project managers, have you ever felt like you should get that promotion or a better job? Start a business. Write that book. Have you ever felt you were made for more but didn't know where to start?
Welcome to the PM for the Masses podcast with your host, Cesar and
Learn from the experts. Think outside the box. Have a voice, network, and be extraordinary.
PM for the Masses podcast.
Well, welcome us again to the Project Manage for the Masses podcast. This is episode 103, and I have again with me here today, Traci Duez. Good morning, Traci.
Good morning, Cesar.
Have you shifted your mindset yet?
I've shifted my mindset, and I've had to because last weekend it was like 90 degrees here in Houston, and this weekend it's going to be like freezing at like 65 or something. Whew.
I know. I feel for you. Today we woke up to about an inch of snow on the ground, and it's the first snow of the season, and I'm not ready for it.
Oh my!
Yeah, so I need to shift my mindset as well.
Right.
I go for, instead of thinking, snow, I'll just think, I'm just thankful I have a nice warm house and a car with heated seats.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and food in the fridge and a stove.
There you go.
So, Traci, in the previous two episodes, we talked about mindfulness, and then we talked about mindset last time. And we ended, if I remember well, last week we ended on a promise that we would talk about how to shift our mindsets. Let's talk about that then. Absolutely,
yeah. And since I haven't done decades of research on this, but Dr. Carol Dweck has, I'm going to share with you some of the ideas that come from her book, Mindset.
Sounds great.
Yeah, so she says there's actually 4 steps to shifting your mindset. And the first one has to do with just being aware of the fixed mindset, which I call it like the critic. You have that critic in your head that everything you do, it has to be near perfect, right? Mm-hmm. And then if it isn't, then we criticize ourselves and beat ourselves up. Meanwhile, other people, I have to share this with you. My friend just she did her own hair, like colored her own hair, mm-hmm. and was like, oh my gosh, look at this. And I'm like, it looked just like her hair always does. I mean, seriously, she's like, there are no highlights left. I used this color and I should have just gone to my usual stylist and I didn't notice the difference, right? Mm-hmm. But of course, yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, my hair's terrible. Look how different it looks. And I think that's what our critic does a lot. It notices little tiny things that no one else on the planet notices, but then yells at us, basically. Mm-hmm. So that's what we talked about last time, the fixed mindset and how that shows up. So being able to recognize that. So if you did the workbook from the last episode, you'll have a pretty good idea of the areas in your life where you have a fixed mindset. So you'll be aware of it.
Mm-hmm. And you can find that at pmforthemasses.com/102. And speaking of doing your own hair, when I was in high school, the smartest kid he's a kind of genius guy, and he decided to, his name was Fabio. So 5 Fabios in my class, high school class, Traci. That's
hilarious.
It's Brazil in the 90s. Right. And he decided to shave an F on his on the side of his head. And he did it, and he showed up at school and the next day, and he didn't look very good because he did it looking at the mirror, so it was a backwards F.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
So there was a lot of awareness for that.
Yes.
From the rest of the kids.
And criticism as well, I bet. Yes, yeah.
I would say that one was valid.
Right. Exactly. His internal critic, obviously, though, didn't notice that while it was happening. But that is hilarious. So there was a lot of external critics. Yes.
Right. Which takes us to the second step.
Yes, which has to do with mindfulness, which helps you to realize at that moment that you have a choice. And so that's back from episode 101, where we gave you some mindfulness exercises. So you're going to see how all these relate to one another. Mm-hmm. Right. And so practicing mindfulness allows you to be aware that you don't have to listen to that critic in your head, mm-hmm. which is, for some people, a new thought. Like, what do you mean I don't have to listen to my thoughts? You don't.
Yeah. So to me, that that sounds a bit more. I can get behind the being more aware. I mean, I think last week was pretty obvious, right? Like, once you start, even though we may think of ourselves as having a growth mindset, there are areas, and I hope that everybody was convinced last week that there are some areas in your life that you have a fixed mindset, and so that awareness, it's kind of it's not a hard thing to get your brain around. But how do you practice mindful? How do you practice this? Not listening to your thoughts on this. How do you do that?
Yeah. So mindfulness, what I call the practice of mindfulness, and that word's overused, but what I call the practice of mindfulness is just listening to your thoughts and watching them like go by in your head. So some of the exercises that are in the handout there from the 101 episode, it has to do with, just thinking about eating, let's just say, right? And you just totally be present with the chewing or whatever, how it feels in your mouth and all that kind of stuff. In the meantime, thoughts are going through your head, but you're just going to observe those and you're not going to judge them. And you just, okay, so I started thinking about the garbage that needs to go out on Thursdays or whatever. That's okay. Okay, great. And then what's the next thought? And you just you move on, and you can start to realize that, yeah, there's noise in your head or there's thoughts in your head, but you get to choose your focus. And so you can choose to continue chewing on whatever you're eating, right? And once that's part of being able to recognize that you have a choice. And mindfulness, the more you practice it, the more you realize that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, so that makes sense. And I think a lot of people can maybe relate to a moment during the day or during the week when you are, like, I'll give you an example, right? So when I work from home, as we mentioned already, and my kids are growing up fast. My oldest is going to be 11 soon, and my youngest is just turning 4. And because I've seen the oldest one grow up so fast, I am keenly aware that this stage goes by so fast, and a lot of times it's after work, it's after dinner time, and I just have a couple hours to play with them, and they're just so excited. But I find like my mind is still at work or on something else, and I'm not living that moment. If I picking up the 4-year-old, in a few years I won't be able to do that anymore, or playing with my boy. In a few years he's not going to want to play with me anymore. So I find myself constantly like, I need to soak it in here in this moment, and be present and be mindful of this. So would you say that is an example of?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. That's a great example, because you could continue to let your mind think about work. You could continue just to let it do whatever it's doing, and rather being mindful means, hey, you stop it and you recognize, oh crap, I'm thinking about work. This isn't I want to be in the moment. I want to be with my kids. I want to, cherish these moments and be able just to have this experience fully and completely in the present. And that's being mindful. That's being able to do that and know that you have a choice, which some people don't go through most of their lives not realizing they have a choice. And you'll recognize them because they're the people that said, oh, well, she made me do that. Mm-hmm. Right? Well, no, she acted in a way that might have triggered you to do something. But in the moment, you had a choice of whether to do that or to choose to do something else. And that's really what mindfulness allows us to do. It allows us to get unstuck from the habits that are already in our head.
Mm-hmm. And the third step then is to shift, right? So what's the third step then?
Yeah, exactly. So now that you've recognized that you can choose to not listen to your critic, you can shift to your coach. And we all have those aspects in our lives that, hey, we're pretty good in those areas, and we have a growth mindset in those areas. Like when it came to work, I had a growth mindset when I was a project manager, a director of an IT consulting company. Hey, if somebody had an idea or a question or a critique of me, I was like, oh, sure. I just wanted to learn. I wanted to grow in my career. And so I know what that feels like. I know what I focused on. And so when it came to relationships, I had a little more difficult time. If somebody got angry or mad, or I blamed it on myself and was like, "Oh, you're a loser. That's why nobody likes you," and it just mushroomed into this big thing. Well, I can take that, realizing that, okay, if somebody gets angry with me in a relationship, whatever, that's part of life. And I can remember, oh, you know what? I'm going to shift and I'm going to look at, okay, what am I accountable for? What did I do? What was my part in this? And then how can I grow? So then I start to focus really on the attributes and the characteristics of a growth mindset, because everyone has an area in their life where they have one, I believe. And we also have the other side too. So it's now being aware enough to be able to make that shift.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then we take action.
Yeah. And, I always talk about taking action, because what that does is that sort of solidifies in your brain. It tells your brain, hey, not only did you think this thought, but it was important enough to you and valuable enough to you that you took action on it. And what happens is you start to build up the neural pathways of the growth mindset, so much so that the fixed mindset neural pathways, they actually atrophy. It's called synaptic pruning in neuroscience. And it's really amazing. And so you end up being able to change your brain as you do this. So it doesn't take so much effort all the time. It will the first time you do it, just like anything that you do for the first time. It may even take a lot of effort the second and the third. But if you consistently practice that, if you consistently become aware of where your critic is talking and remembering that you have a choice, and then listening to the coach in your head and then taking action on it, those 4 steps, that's when you'll start to basically rewire your brain. And that stuff's called neuroplasticity, in case any nerds are listening and want to know that.
And I think we talked about this back on episode 2 when we talked about.
Right.
In fact, I think this episode today is like a little complement to what we talked about earlier, years ago. Yes. Yeah. So, and what a nice segue to talk about the next part of this episode, which is, we covered all the 4 steps, right? We
got them all.
So awareness, and then the second step is mindfulness, right? Like realizing and watching your thoughts. The third step is to shift.
Yep.
And then the 4th step is to take action.
Awesome. Yeah.
Cool.
And then you end up changing your thinking, which is the cool thing.
Nice. So, and that leads us to the next topic, which is value dynamics. And that's the name of today's episode, I believe. It's not published yet, so I haven't decided what we're going to call it. But it is the center aspect of what we're talking about here today. So value dynamics, it has to do with values and axiology. Can you explain to us what that is?
Yeah, that's a science that I found by accident. And it's a mathematically based science of value. And a lot of times we believe that the value of things is subjective. And there's a part that is subjective. But overall, when you're comparing 2 things, value is objective. And I don't want to get into all of the mathematical details, because it's based in transfinite calculus and set theory, and people would just turn off this episode. But what it allows us to do, and the reason I found it, was because I had to take an assessment. And you've taken assessments in the past, right, Cesar?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like Myers-Briggs or DISC or some of those. And in this case, my boss was asking me to take this assessment. So whenever that happened, being a person of low self-esteem at the time, I would always take those assessments how I thought my boss would want me to answer them. Right. No one else has ever done that, I'm pretty sure. But so this test that I took, I couldn't figure it out. There weren't obvious answers to it. It was just asking me to rank 2 sets of 18 items, put what I thought was the most valuable or most important at the top, and the worst or least valuable at the bottom. And it was hard. And so they said, hey, it measures how you think. And I was like, oh crap, I didn't want that to happen. And that, because I thought it was actually measuring what you think, but it was only measuring how you think. And so I didn't know that. I didn't realize that you could actually measure your thinking habits and find out like which ones are good and accurate reflections of reality, and maybe which perspectives in your head were inaccurate. And so what value dynamics allows you to do is to look at, hey, which thoughts are your coach and which ones tend to be your critic and are kind of biased and only see part of the data, like the stuff you do wrong instead of all the value that you create. Mm-hmm.
So one, you mentioned that values are not relative. Is that how you worded it?
It's not real. Subject. They aren't all subjective, right?
Yeah. So okay.
Yeah. That when you're comparing two things, which is what a decision is, it could be more than two, but two or more things. Value is actually objective when you're trying to decide, and so that's really what I wanted to talk about today. Is when I discovered this science, it totally changed my life, and when I started to realize that you can look at things differently and make better decisions based on science, being a nerdy, geeky person, I was like, hallelujah. That is, something that I was looking for.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a lot of what project managers are looking for too, because a lot of us are we talked about this all the time on the show. We most of us come from a technical background, and now we are leading people, which is very much unscientific. Most of it is, it's just the science of, I guess, if you can call it science, it's about trust and leadership and understanding people, right? And a lot of us feel like lost. Like, I don't know, where's the spreadsheet that tells me exactly, how to do this. So anytime there is a way to, turn some of what we do into data that we can analyze and make decisions, that's always welcome.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm with you there. Yeah, because that was the hardest thing too, right? Because I did the same thing and shifted into a tech lead role, then a project manager role, then a director role, and all along the way, it's hard because you have to balance things, and then if you're trained in PMI's methodology for project management, then you have this whole project management book of knowledge and all these processes and procedures and best practices, and then you have to try and figure out, okay, well, which one do I use, which ones do I discard? Because on the very first page of the book it says you're not going to use all these, you got to figure out which ones to use. Well, wait a minute, you don't tell me how to do that. You just throw them all out there.
And even, right. And I think that can be said for any aspect of that book. Any chapter, any page, you don't have to use it. So what do you have to use?
Yes.
Cool. So I think you talk about values having dimensions. So what does that mean?
Yeah. So one of the things that I discovered was that there are three dimensions to value, and most of our lives we only focus on two, and these dimensions of value are hierarchical, which means there's an order to them, and the two that we tend to focus on are the two lowest. If you think about school, you're taught like a right and a wrong. You're taught like systems of stuff. You're taught math. Math is a system. Language is a system. And that's really the lowest dimension of value. It doesn't mean it's not valuable. It just means that other things have more value, like what you produce out of the system. So systemic things are like rules and policies and plans and processes and ideas and expectations. They're all stuff, if you think about it, that we make up in our heads. Mm-hmm. So mathematically, you can think of it as a 1 or a 0, like a circle. A circle is part of the system of geometry. You can't actually touch a circle because a circle just describes points equidistant from the center, right?
Right.
That connect. And so now there are things that are shaped like a circle, that look like a circle, but you can't actually touch a circle.
Circles a circle doesn't exist. It's not a thing. It's right? Is that what you're saying? It's like
Yeah.
it's like the number 2. You're not gonna go to the next galaxy and find. Oh, we found 2.
Right. Exactly. Because math is also a system, right? So any of these things are mental constructs, as we call them. We just created them. Human beings, mankind created these systems in their heads to explain stuff. And that stuff that it's explaining is actually in the next dimension of value. It's the extrinsic, the measurable, tangible stuff, the stuff that we can sense.
And that is the highest dimension. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's what we've been taught is the highest dimension, right? But it's not the highest dimension. Okay. You think about it, right? So you have these systems. If you think about school, you're taught the systems, and then you're judged and measured based on how well you learned the system. So you got an A, or you got a B, or an F, or an E, or whatever grades you happen.
Yeah, which in and of themselves are also systems of symbolism, right? Letter A, letter B.
Absolutely.
Very
but
made
they
up.
But they use them to measure, right? So we definitely use systems to then measure things. So then the actual measurement is extrinsic, what we call extrinsic. That's the measurable piece of it. So yes, we're using a system, which is valuable, but not as valuable as what you can do with it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So those are usually the 2 dimensions of value that we deal in. And I know for project managers, that's really what project management has been about. It's, if you look in the PMBOK there, you'll see that it's all about, hey, these are the measurements that you should be taking, the system that you should be using, and this is where they should be. And I love to talk about value because to project managers, because project managers have always been told, what's a good project, Cesar? There's like 3 things to describe a good project, right?
Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Like the budget, scope, and timeline? Okay.
Absolutely. Okay. So a good project is on time. Yep. Right. It's within budget and within scope.
Right.
So I often ask when I go speak places, have you ever done a project that was on time, on budget, within scope, and wasn't viewed as a success?
Yeah, I think there are examples of that, and there are examples of projects that did not hit any of those 3 and are seen as successes.
Absolutely, right? Isn't that funny? Right?
Yeah.
So the system that we use to judge a good project, it sometimes fails us.
Yeah.
Which usually that means it's not a good system. But I don't want to say that out loud because there's probably a lot of PMI and PMP people listening to this.
I think it was episode 1. Was it? No, there was the other show that I used to do, the construction industry podcast, that I talk about the Sydney Opera House and how it's an amazing landmark for Australia. It brings a lot of money today, and it's successful, beautiful thing. And it was totally over budget, complete 100% failed their timeline, and it was not at all what the first set of requirements mandated it to be. So it's like total failure as far as projects go, but you can't argue that it's not a success as a project when it comes, I guess, from a value perspective, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever you think of Sydney, like, what's the first postcard picture you get?
Right.
And so there's tremendous value in that project that was gained because it didn't have to do with just the extrinsic. It had to do with the highest dimension of value, which is the intrinsic. And that has to do with the uniqueness, being priceless, irreplaceable. It has to do with the human experience of what's been created. And if you think about that as you go to Sydney, right? What's that experience? What would that experience be like?
Yeah, exactly. It's like you take the you're talking about symbols and how they can be useful, right? But they're not a thing in and of themselves. Like you can learn about circles, for example, in school, and then go out there, skip school the next day and use what you learned to make a hula hoop and play instead of going to school, and have a valuable experience with a thing that is actually, you can actually touch, that is not a circle, but it's you use the concept of the circle to make it.
Absolutely. And I think that's really what project management is about. And it's really what leadership is about. It's about taking ideas, turning them into things, but then the thing isn't the be all end all. It's what's the human experience behind it. Because you know what? We all probably had Walkmans or stuff like that, right? And then this thing like called an iPod came out. Like who needs that? Because I had my little Walkman thing. I didn't need that. I mean, just put the cassette in there, press play, does the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. But it wasn't about that. Why did people go buy iPods? Because it had to do with the experience. It made life easier. It made life more enjoyable. And that's really the piece. That's what I tell project managers, leaders. You don't deliver like a work product. What you deliver is a human experience. Mm-hmm. And when you start to realize that's the piece, that there's no project out there that a human being hasn't paid for.
Right.
Right. And so that's the part that the intrinsic piece of what you're delivering is the stuff that's most overlooked. And yet it's the stuff that's most valued.
Right. Yeah. And if you think about today's success stories when it comes to businesses, for example, like Apple, you mentioned the iPod. I mean, it's all about the experience. From the packaging, right? Like you when you get a new iPhone, I mean, the way it's presented to you, the way it's how easy it is to open the box, and it's just a great experience. They have the Apple Store where you go and you're treated nicely, and with people greet you with a smiley face, and they all look clever and smart and with it, and you can touch all the stuff and nobody's bothering you. It's all about the experience. Amazon, for example, they're not selling anything new. I mean, you can buy like a hair dryer at Amazon. I mean, that's like 100-year-old technology, right? But the fact that it's so easy to buy it, and that shipping is included, and it just shows up at your door, that's an experience, right?
Absolutely.
So there's nothing special about the hairdryer, but how you get it and the experience of getting it is what they're selling.
Yeah, and that's when people truly understand value dynamics, you start to see it everywhere, and you start to realize it really is about the human experience. Mm-hmm. And when, as leaders, in terms of self-leadership, when you start to realize that you have an impact on how someone else feels, how someone else experiences you and your work, and when you start to focus on that, that's when you are seen in completely different eyes. I know you probably know, when I first started managing projects, I was just the taskmaster. I was just, hey, your task is supposed to be done by this time. Why is it not done? Oh, your grandma died. Sorry, but your task was due. I mean, it was, okay, maybe not that bad, but that's what it was all about, right? Because I was just a young project manager learning how to do this. And that's what I was taught. It's about being on time, on budget, within scope.
Right.
Never mind that no one on your team ever wants to work with you again, as long as it comes in those three parameters there, then we're good.
Or whatever, or never mind whatever you created on time, on scope, and on budget. It's a turd.
Right.
All right.
Exactly. Hey, but it was done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So that's a lot of the. Yeah, I remember talking about this with you, and I attended your talk here in town 4 or 5 years ago when you came, and that just changes it really changed my perspective on a lot of things, and how you can always try to find that experience and that value in whatever you're doing, podcasting, for example, like I made a choice that was kind of deliberate to just be myself, So the experience of people listening to the show, they're not just like learning something new, which they could just do anywhere. Just pick up a book or read a blog post, or but it's the experience of me talking to you, for example, but through my perspective, right? And that's an experience. I'm definitely not right all the time. I'm not the most knowledgeable project manager out there. But I'm providing an experience. You can sit in your car and listen to this conversation right now as you drive to work, and feel pumped, and so you can get to work and do better, right? And that's an experience. It's not a thing that I'm giving people, right?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, you're giving them some knowledge and stuff, right? But it's really about the experience. And so when we adhere to this hierarchy of value, these natural laws, what I call value dynamics, just like aerodynamics. When you adhere to the laws of aerodynamics, you can fly.
Right.
When you don't, well, bad things happen. So same thing here with value dynamics. When you adhere to these natural laws of value, you're going to generate and create value, which I believe all of us want to do in every aspect of our life. I mean, I truly believe that every decision we make, we believe in that moment, it was going to create the greatest value. That's why we made it. We don't ever make a choice and say, oh, you know what? I could make this choice, but this one sucks a little more, so I'm just going to do this one. This one will add a little more suckiness to my life. Just going to make that. No, we always try to. We're not always accurate in doing so. But when our focus is on that, we're going to create value. If we violate the laws, then we're going to diminish or even destroy value.
Mm-hmm. And by value, you mean intrinsic value, right? The experience,
Yeah, well, it could be in any of the dimensions.
Okay.
But yeah, usually we hit the intrinsic piece when we overvalue things that are systems or the measurable, tangible pieces that we create. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, like the winning at all costs.
Right.
Right. What do we end up doing? Okay, yeah, you end up, I don't know, maybe making a lot of money. Bernie, what's his name? What was it? Madoff, right?
Yeah.
You end up making a lot of money, but you destroyed a lot of lives.
Right.
Right? And so valuing the extrinsic, in this case, money, over the human beings.
Yeah. Or yourself, right? Like, or you can work yourself to death, or just get sick, or neglect your family, or, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I loved, when you finished, talked about your journey at the end of, what was that, episode 99. Mm-hmm. I loved hearing you talk about, the choices that you made, because they were kind of in line with what we're talking about here in terms of value dynamics, because you used the word fulfillment a number of times in that part. And that fulfillment is intrinsic, right? And you talked about, I can make more money elsewhere. You could have a nice, bigger, better title somewhere, although you get to make up your own there at Automatic. Right? You could have more status or something like that. And it almost sounded like there was well, you're Canadian too, so not just Brazilian. So you apologize for everything. So it almost sounded like you were apologetic that you didn't have the role or title of project manager. And a role or a title, that's extrinsic. That's the thing that you do, right? Intrinsic is who you are. And that's where the fulfillment piece comes in, because that's telling, that says when you feel fulfilled, that means that what you believe, those are your systems, what you do and who you are all aligned. And I think that's the place where a lot of us want to get to, and we don't know how.
Yeah.
Right? Because we've always been taught that the system and the stuff, the doing, is the most important and the most valuable, when in fact, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, especially if your motivation is external, like, what people are going to think, or what my friends will say, or are people going to judge me, or, because I decided to go work construction instead of being a white collar executive, that I find that's misguided, right? Like, because you can't please people, and you don't know what goes on in people's minds, and guess what? Tomorrow you're going to meet somebody else, and they're not going to like the choices that you made. So what, are you going to change again because you met somebody new? The one person you live with all the time is yourself. So that's the one you should aim to get along with and quote unquote please, right?
Yeah, and get to know as well. I mean, and that's really what we're talking about. We talked, this whole series is about self-leadership. Well, it's about getting to know who you are, right? And getting to understand how you think, how you process value, what you see as valuable, and what kind of experiences do you want, right? And going after those. And I love, you even talked about at the beginning of this episode about, your kids. I mean, that's a human experience, and you gotta take advantage of that while you have them.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool, Tracy. This is a great insight right here. I think I hope others listening right now got it the way that I did.
Well, that's cool. Yeah. And so what I want to leave the audience with, the listeners with, is I want to give you a question that you can keep at the top of your mind to hopefully remind you of what we talked about, right? The hierarchy of value, and to also help you make better choices in the moment. And we call it the central question. I don't know why, but I think it's a good name, I guess. But it's asking yourself regularly to have this, like I said, at the top of your mind. Ask yourself, hey, what choice can I make, and what action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value? Or if greatest net value doesn't resonate with you, you can say to make the biggest difference in the world.
Mm-hmm. And so what choice can I make, and action can I take in this moment? And do you mean like every moment, or specific, like right now, people listening right now?
Yeah. Well, it's, a lot of times people talk to me, my clients they have a hard time prioritizing things, right? Because they're just so busy. And this allows you to, because truly you can't do anything yesterday because it's already gone. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that steakhouse out here by my house, it has painted right on the side of the steakhouse, and this goes to the next part. It says free steaks tomorrow. Right? So you can't do anything tomorrow either. Mm-hmm. It's about making the best use of your time right now. Is that saying you never plan? No, the best use of your time right now might be putting down a plan so that you don't have to think about, okay, what are you going to do tomorrow? What are you going to do the next day? You already have the whole project. That's what project management is, planned out. That's a good thing. That's a good use of time, right? Mm-hmm. But a lot of times what happens is we get so busy that we forget to slow down and say, hey, how can I create the greatest value? I mean, that's what your company wants you to do. Matter of fact, that's what your family wants you to do. That's what your community wants you to do. And hopefully that's what you want to do. So being able to do that, we all want to create value, but so many of us fail to slow down and take the time to do that. So this question, I tell people, just ask the question the first thing when you wake up in the morning. That's all. And it's not so that you can answer it. It's so that you can shift your mind and get it focused on value. And then maybe later on in the day, because you told your brain it was important enough to ask in the morning, maybe your brain will stop you while you're feeling maybe discombobulated or discouraged or frustrated and say, wait a minute, what choice can I make and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest value or to make the biggest difference? Mm-hmm. And what it does is, I don't know if you've ever done this, Cesar, because I know you work from home, I work from home, and there's sometimes so much stuff I have to do that I will just sit here at my desk and stare at my 2 monitors.
Yep.
You've been there?
Yeah, because you know that anything, like, especially when you have, like, I have an hour right now before whatever, dinner, or have to go out for whatever. And like anything that I would start right now, I look at the to-dos, right? Anything that I need to start right now, I won't be able to finish in an hour. So what do I do? And then you think about it, and then as you're thinking about it, the clock is ticking. And and then you're just paralyzed.
Right. Exactly. And so that's when this question for me, I mean, I have it on a sticky note right on one of my monitors, and it just refocuses me. Okay, what can I do in this moment? Maybe I can't do a task in the amount of time that I have, but I can plan a little better, or I can look at my day, or I can schedule something or make a phone call, whatever it happens to be. There is something you can do with the time that you have left. But if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're actually focusing on all the stuff that you have to do, not the value that you can add. And by asking that question, it kind of pulls you up out of the tunnel or the dungeon that you might be in, and allows you to look at things from a broader perspective. And that's really what we want.
Very cool. That's awesome. So it's a great exercise for everybody. And if people want to take it a step further, they can. There is a freebie today, isn't there?
Yeah. I just put together a 1-page sheet, and it has the central question at the top, and then it has just a reminder of the 3 dimensions of value and what's in each of the 3 dimensions of value right underneath it. And so it's just, like I said, 1 page, 8.5 by 11, that you can just print out if you'd like, keep it with you so that you can refer to it whenever you're in those kind of situations where you want to make a better choice or a different choice than maybe what you've done in the past. Shift out of that critic and the fixed mindset into the growth mindset. Very
cool. Yeah, and if you're listening right now, you can find this at pmforthemasses.com/103, and that's for episode 103. Traci, thank you so much once again for coming out to the show and sharing all these wonderful things.
Always my pleasure. This is so much fun, Cesar. Thanks for allowing me to do this. It was awesome.
Thanks, Traci. And you're listening right now. Thanks again for listening. And we'll talk to you again next time. And until then, remember that life is a project and you are the manager. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you for listening to the PM for the Masses podcast.
Tune in next week for more great ideas on how to manage your projects better and truly stand out in your industry.
PMforthemasses.com